Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. LaTanya Langley serves as Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary at BIC, one of the best-known international brands in writing instruments, lighters, shavers, and other promotional products based in the greater New York area. She has global responsibility, that is, for managing all legal matters for BIC's largest business unit, supply chain, and leads anti-corruption compliance. She's also responsible for legal matters in North America, Latin America, and was previously responsible for legal matters in Africa, Middle East, and Asia Pacific. I count myself lucky that we have history together, and I am so delighted to dive into this interview with the fabulous LaTanya Langley. LaTanya, welcome to the podcast. Listeners, I am so delighted. I have been waiting. It's like Christmas for me or something. I'm just so excited about this conversation. You just heard the bio of my good friend, LaTanya Langley. She's on the podcast. She's going to tell us about moving from the passenger seat to the driver's seat. And I know you are going to get so much from this interview. So be sure to get your pen, pencil, pad, and it's going to be really, really good. LaTanya, how are you?
Hi, I am great, Simone. I am absolutely honored to be sitting here having this conversation with you. In fact, your light has just shined for so many years in the work that you do. And I'm just excited to be in your company. So it's Christmas for me as well.
Oh, yay. So let's get right to it. You know, this podcast is about being in the driver's seat and really owning your career, taking control, holding on to that wheel. And I know sometimes we flex between passenger and driver's seat, but tell us about your journey to the driver's seat. When did you know that you were in the driver's seat for your career?
This is a great question because, if you look at my resume, it has a story, but that is just a snapshot of both my professional and my personal journey. There were hills and valleys along the way. I started in a large international law firm, and then I moved into a larger international law firm, only to join a large regional firm so that I could have more end-to-end experience in the work that I do before moving in-house to the world's largest alcohol beverage company, which you know so well, which is where we met. And even at that company, I had experiences where I worked and I lived in Africa for a number of years. And that led me to my current role, working in emerging markets. That's my experience, my specialty. But each one of the experiences along that journey was a building block that prepared me for where I am today. So, what was the defining moment for me? What signified that I was in the driver's seat? I think I actually remember the day very clearly. I had always battled with people not getting me, or not fitting in, or in many cases being the only, whether that be the only woman in the room or on a team or on a project, or being the only person of color, or both. And my confidence at times was shaken. And this contributed to me feeling the imposter syndrome. One day, I became quite vulnerable with my boss and just expressed my concern about feeling this way. And she looked at me and she said, okay, own it. And I will tell you, I felt like I had an out of body experience at that moment. My life and my career was forever changed by just those two words. I broke the silence by being vulnerable with my manager, but she helped me to separate feelings from fact. And it was from that point that I was able to accentuate the positives, and I began a quest to write the rules and to develop a new script about my career. Being myself was enough. And I realized that my differences and my not fitting in was actually a strength and not my weakness. But I had to learn how to recognize and use that as my superpower. So the skills, the talents, the gifts that I had were mine. I was born with them, but I had to own them and I had to show up with them whenever the opportunity presented itself. So I recognize that the restraints will always be there, but it was very important from that moment forward for me to understand that I needed to use my multiple intelligences and my authenticity as my leadership tool. And that's when I became truly fearless about being different and realizing that that difference was not a barrier.
I love that so much. It really is resonating with me. And I think some of our listeners may struggle with really standing in their authentic truth of who they are, because there are cultures that don't appreciate differences. And so, you have to find your spot or your place where you can really flourish. So what are the key ingredients, or what do you look for? What do you tell people to look for so that they can walk in their strength and really be in the driver's seat for their careers?
Find your superpower. I tell everyone this, and I know, it sounds cliche, but in fact, each one of us has a different skill or a talent or a gift that is ours. No one else has that gift. And you have to own it and then show up whenever you can. But you have to exercise the ability to discover what that superpower is. And so for me, my superpower was the fact that I was different, the fact that I thought differently about things, the fact that I had a different perspective that is not, the standard point of view. So when I'm in a room, I walk in there with that confidence that I have a point of view that needs to be shared and used to move the business in a strategic direction. So working on figuring out that superpower, I think, is really what people should focus on.
Are there any resources that help you to hone your superpower so that you can, again, walk in it? Any resources that you have leveraged that may be of use to our listeners just to really hone in on or uncover that superpower?
I am a fan of self-help books as well as podcasts about, growing yourself, finding your value, finding your true self. And I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read a lot of books. And so for me, it's always been continuing to educate myself in areas that are outside of my expertise. And so podcasts have been very, very helpful for me. Also, I also have a supportive network of both allies and champions. And many times that supportive network will reconfirm for you what your value is. And that supportive network includes people that I've known since I was 5 years old. And it also includes people that I've met along the way. But always having, a network of allies, a network of champions, strategic relationships is very helpful, a very helpful resource. Another resource, believe it or not, is a professional coach.
Mm.
You know, I've had professional coaches in different times of my career. Some have helped me with job discussions, but some have also helped me with just personal discussions. I remember one time a coach said to me, "It's time for you to move on. You're not reaching your full potential." And it took someone else to tell me that, even though I had known it, for me to activate. Another resource is therapy. I think therapists are amazing tools to help remind you of who you are. And so I fully recommend therapists. And you don't go to a therapist only because there's a problem, but sometimes you go to therapists to find new solutions. So that's been quite helpful. And then, of course, sports. Sports has helped me in terms of strategy and collaboration and teamwork. And then prayer and meditation. That for me is probably the most strongest tool that I have. It's just prayer and meditation, remaining centered and hearing the voices in my head that are guiding me on my career journey.
So many valuable nuggets. I must admit that I don't think anyone has ever mentioned sports. So, I played volleyball back in the day. It's been a minute.
You did. You were an amazing spiker, I must say.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit more about sports. And, if there's someone listening and they're like, sports, I could do that. What should they, should they be thinking about in terms of parallel skills or how this is applicable to navigating to the driver's seat? What should they keep in mind?
Well, for one thing, sports reminds you to be a corporate athlete, to always remain in shape, to always continue to exercise that muscle that you have, right? Sports also helps you to be collaborative. It reminds you of the importance of teamwork. It also helps you to become more strategic. I mean, you're exercising the same skills on a basketball court that you actually exercise in the C-suite. It helps you to recognize your competitive advantage and to use it at the right time. I find myself pivoting and setting picks in the workplace. It's a balance of, healthy skill sets to win, whether you're on the court, the volleyball court, the basketball court, the softball field, or if you're in the boardroom. And there are a lot of parallels there. I find myself many times in the boardroom thinking about, well, what would I do if I was in this situation, on the field? Mm-hmm. And then it guides me on a decision that I need to make in the boardroom.
Wonderful. I mean, your ingredients are so powerful. A lot of people don't talk about the power of therapy. And in the year that we are coming off of, just to keep your head right. But I love that you said also uncover new solutions. So fabulous. And, loved all the things that you talked about. I wonder if you could talk to us just a little bit about risk, because you mentioned being in Africa for a while, and that's a big career move to be open to going to a new location. I certainly can remember being like, nope, I got to stay where I am. That's too far away from home. But you went, I don't know how many miles Africa is from here, but pretty far.
Absolutely. I think the message to women has always been, you can sit here, but don't expect to be at the head of the table. And even for women who have approached their peak, there's always been this blocker, right? If you did the same things as a man, but if you're a woman, sometimes you're unfairly seen as overly ambitious, self-serving. And I feel like once I began to take risks and try new opportunities that were not traditionally held by women, and I took up space, it was at that point where my journey accelerated. The Art of War says the difficulty of tactical maneuvering consists in turning the devious into the direct. and misfortune into gain. It also says we are not fit to lead an army on the march unless we're familiar with the face of the country, its mountains, its forests, its pitfalls, its precipices, and its marshes and swamps. What that says to me is the only way that you can really advance to the next level of your career is to be able to explore those mountains and those forests and those pitfalls, and those marshes and those swamps, taking on roles and opportunities, even when you may not be able to check all the boxes, right? And becoming an expert in a space that is not frequently traveled is actually a business advantage. Taking on roles where maybe the shoes are really big to fill, roles that you're afraid of. Those are the roles that are for you. If it doesn't scare you, then it's not for you. And so taking on new challenges and opportunities and risks have a high return. So I've taken opportunities where I've raised my hand to move to Ghana to take on an opportunity. I'd never gone to Ghana, didn't know where Ghana was. I never worked in that type of market, but I raised my hand for that assignment because it was unknown to me. And had I not taken that assignment, I would not have been prepared for the role that came after that assignment, which was a broader emerging markets role. And I also have taken on strategic non-legal roles. So I'm a lawyer, that's my expertise, but I've also led commercial strategy projects. Why? Because I was afraid of them. And I didn't have the expertise, but I wanted to stretch my muscle in business strategy and business partnering and commercial and having a stronger financial acumen. The only way I could do that was by taking a risk and taking on opportunities that were typically closed off to me.
It strikes me, LaTanya, that what you're talking about is really being strategic and really being planful about your career, the moves. It's almost like chess. The moves that you make need to be very strategic because, again, you can go back to the place of just allowing other people to dictate the mountains, the valleys, the places you go. And I know because I've done that, okay, that sounds good. I'll do that. But really being mindful of what it is that you want to do and then charting that course, getting the right resources. You talked about a personal board of directors. You talked about, champions and allies, coach and executive coach, just useful resources to help you on that journey. So I think planning, from what I'm hearing, how much of a plan did you have?
Every step I took was intentional. And when I say intentional, it was I wanted to take on opportunities that no one else wanted because I felt that was the space where I could spread my wings because no one else wanted to be there. Instead of trying to compete in a space where everyone else is competing, why not go in a space where people are afraid to go? And so I remember when I took the assignment in Africa, I had colleagues who said, are you really going to leave your comfortable abode in Connecticut? You're in the best place to practice law. Why would you want to go? And I stayed focused. And I knew that this role was going to give me a different appetite for risk. I knew that this role was going to force me to mature in areas that I would not have been able to had I stayed in my comfort zone. And so while that role was quite uncomfortable, I became comfortable with uncomfortability. And that role actually stretched me far beyond any other role I ever had. And now I have a skill set that none of my other teammates had because I was willing to go into that unknown territory to grow.
I love that. I'm thinking of Shonda Rhimes and talking about the year of yes and just being able to say yes and to really grow with each experience. Love it. Love it. What a great thing to do. And I love that you talked about even roles that aren't necessarily what you want to do, but to pick up new skill sets. That should be something that listeners you can consider to grow in your career.
Yes. And in fact, I found that most of my strongest relationships have come from projects and assignments that were outside of my expertise, but I was willing to work with someone in an area that they needed support on. So I've led, mergers and acquisition projects as the business person and not as the lawyer. I've taken on corporate initiatives that had absolutely nothing to do with legal, but it put me in the room with my CEO. It put me in the room with my global head of HR. And that's what helped create and build those relationships, because they no longer saw me as the lawyer, but they actually saw me as their stakeholder, their partner.
Wonderful. Can you give any tips to building those strategic relationships? I know you just talked about being in the room, and oftentimes projection, happens through these relationships. And sometimes we have to build our ASK muscles to ask for what we want. Can you give any tips on building the relationship and really knowing when to ask for help?
First, it starts with being your authentic self, right? People need to be able to feel like they can trust you. And it doesn't mean, tell all of your business. And what it means is allow people to see you, right? And you start there. And then you start building on ways that you can help others. A lot of people think, how can I get support for myself? But what they forget is the best way to get support is to provide support. The best way to be mentored is to mentor, right? Because there are going to be voices outside of the room that are going to speak for you. And there are going to be people who are going to open up doors to new opportunities for you and in your career, and support you and encourage you simply because of the support and encouragement you gave them. So always remember that it's a two-way street when it comes to building relationships, and find ways to connect with people based on their need and not your need.
I love that. I'm thinking of Dr. McKinney, who was on the podcast, and he said something very similar to what you're saying, just about how he's navigated his career just by really helping others along the journey. Exactly what you're saying. So wonderful. I want to ask you, as we begin to wrap up the interview, you've said some things that have stuck in my head. If I were to put a label, I'm thinking of what I'd call the episode, but if you had a book and you wanted to, as a matter of fact, I'm remembering you were in this book when we worked together at Diageo. There was this book, and I remember you were a part of it. So now, if you had a book and it talked about your career trajectory or where you are in your career, what would you title this book?
Own it. You have to be authentically you. As you grow your leadership capabilities and you have opportunities to demonstrate them, and as you get higher profile assignments or projects, you're going to need endorsement. You're going to need organizational endorsement, right? People need to know who you are. And the only way that can happen is you walk in the room with your skills, with your confidence, and you own it. You take up space. I remember I had some training a while back. When you come in the room, don't sit in a little corner with your notebook and your pen. Spread out. Let people know that you have a place at the table. And you have to walk in with that own it mentality. And it lightens up the room, frankly.
I love that. I love it. When you said own it, I was like, exclamation point, own it, love it, exclamation point, love it. Yes, wonderful. Well, LaTanya, it's been such an honor to have you sharing your story, your inspiring story on the podcast. Any parting words?
One thing I would just highlight for your audience is that listen to your body, listen to, take care of your health, full circle, mind, body, and spirit. This is a very difficult time for many. And the one thing that I did not do for myself, which I do now, is I focused on everyone else accept myself.
Mm.
And so it's important to, feel what you feel, accept what you feel, right? Be open to your body and trust your body. So take care of yourself. That's probably the most important parting word. If you hear nothing else I say today, take care of yourself, mind, body, and spirit.
I appreciate that. I honestly believe that that is a part of the formula for owning your career. And we didn't get into this. I know you talked about, having some health challenges.
Yes.
So I'm glad that you brought that back into the conversation. Absolutely. Self-care, putting yourself on your list. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Well, LaTanya, if our listeners would like to stay in contact with you or connect with you based on this episode, how can they do so?
The best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. I respond to everyone who reaches out to me because I think we all have an obligation to open up the pipeline for others. And so LinkedIn is the best way to contact me. And I look forward to hearing from anyone that's listening.
Wonderful. Well, LaTanya, thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast.
Thank you for having me, Simone.
I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@SimoneMorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.